So we are live with Einkin Artig, and this is a really exciting opportunity because it's a Haas Vegan channel first, because it's the first double interview we're doing. So thank you guys for helping to facilitate that.
Thanks for having
Our
us.
pleasure.
Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'm Keen. I'm the front face of our channel. I'm originally Portuguese, and I am currently in Germany.
And my name is Nick. I'm also part of the channel Einking Arctic, and I'm from Germany.
Amazing. So I know that a lot of people have just recently discovered your channel because it's a relatively new one. And if you guys would like to just talk about kind of how long you've been thinking about making a channel and things like that, or like if you know, it's been just something that I know, Ken, you went vegan pretty recently, right? Like in maybe end of last year?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was a back and forth. Okay, so maybe just to the first part of the channel of the question. I've always wanted to have a YouTube channel, but I never found something that I was really passionate about, so I never created one. So yeah, when I became vegan, I was like, this is something I could actually do, and that we actually consume a lot of content from vegan creators, other vegan creators, and to me, it felt like maybe there would be a gap that we could fill, and that's what motivated us to start the channel.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
amazing. And Nick, have you been a long time vegan, or are you relatively new to veganism as well? Or
No, it's actually quite similar. It's basically the same time frame, so also pretty recent, like end of last year. So yeah, quite recently.
That's amazing. So I'm sure people who are watching are going to be really curious about how you kind of decided to commit to being vegan. With Kin, your situation, I think you said that you had kind of had a little bit more of a back and forth.
Yeah.
Could you elucidate a little bit more about kind of like the reasons for different directions, and then kind of what made you like really commit?
Yeah. So I became vegetarian around 4 years ago. And the reason for that was because I had a lot of stomach problems, and meat in general was very problematic to me personally. So I stopped eating meat and fish, and then I became vegetarian for 4 years. And a year ago, I wanted to become vegan for the ethical reasons, but I was always in this back and forth. I was convinced, but guess not fully convinced. I knew what was happening in the industry, but I guess I had never faced it or watched any footage. So I was always, yeah, I'm vegan, and then I'm not, and then I ate cheese, and yeah, it was constantly this. And then in October last year, I think, right? I watched Dominion. I came across Tash Peterson content, and she was talking about Dominion, and I was like, okay, I don't know what that is. And I watched it, and I was like, okay, you've convinced me. I'm going vegan. So that was, for me, my journey.
So, and Nick, I want to hear about your journey. I know we talk about journeys a lot in veganism, but Ken, specifically something that you said seems interesting to me. Like when you saw the footage of Dominion, what did it really do for you? I guess because you knew like what was happening, but I guess there's something about seeing it, right? That's so powerful. I think that's something we can really take into our activism too. Would you agree that when you kind of see it, it does something else other than just like hearing about it or philosophically agreeing?
I think when someone says, oh, they're mistreating animals, I was like, okay, maybe they pushed them a little bit. I didn't see it, so I didn't know. And then when I saw it, I was like, okay, no, this is actually abuse. This is just terrible. Like I can't be part of this industry. I can't contribute to it. And that was kind of what the image did for me.
Do you think that before you had a different, when you were kind of like halfway in, halfway out of committing, would you say that you had a different idea of what veganism was? Or would you say that you pretty much knew? Because I think a lot of times we also run into this idea of definitions, and people just don't know that veganism actually aligns perfectly with their worldview. Do you think that was at play there too? Or
yeah, that was also a thing. I think I also, and I'm so sorry to vegans. I think I had this misconception that vegans are very preachy and mean. And I think I had, when I was younger, a bad encounter with a vegan that was very more militant in their approach. And I guess I wasn't there to listen at that point or that type of message. So it kind of dissuaded me to be or identify as a vegan. And then only recently when I started seeing other creators and I was like, okay, this is actually not the case, or not always the case, especially with like Earthling Ed and different approaches to the veganism, and maybe a more calm approach to explain what is it about, what they're defending, why they have these positions, and maybe why are some people so emotional about this topic, made me have a better understanding of why people would decide to go vegan.
That's beautiful. Do you think that some element of the non-vegans' emotionality also contributed? I mean, you see how reactive people are, you know?
Yeah, I think I was just like, no, but you're wrong. What do you mean? Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. And I considered myself, I mean, I still do, but back then I also considered myself very empathetic, especially also to animals. So it was just cognitive dissonance. I was like, no, I can't believe I would contribute to such an industry, kind of thing.
I know that feeling all too well, because I actually, similarly, I had gone vegetarian 2 years prior to going vegan. And I remember thinking to myself, when I was in a particularly down kind of point in my life, I was like, I'm a good person. Like, I'm good to animals and all this, like, you know, I'm even good to animals, you know, it's like kind of like, and then that was part of my core identity at that point. And it only took somebody challenging my consumption of eggs. There was somebody who was from India, and he just challenged my consumption of eggs, and he said, it's not vegetarian in my culture. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? I looked into it, and then I saw the conveyor belt and the chicks getting ground up, and there was a little related link. This was on YouTube. It was, I think it was from Freely the Banana Girl. It was something about the dairy industry. And then, you know, I knew that milk came from cows. But you almost don't make the connection that, wait, they have to actually be impregnated first, like they're mothers, they have families, you know, all these things that we just don't recognize when we first look at the product, you know? I think there's also something really worth exploring where you talk about how you had initially been turned off from going vegan or thinking about it. There's this idea of kind of knowing what we want to be based on what we see versus what we don't see. So like a kid might see like a firefighter, an astronaut, a doctor when they're a kid, and they're like, oh, I want to be like that. But that feeling, I think, is weaker than the feeling of what they really don't want to be. Like if they see something, they're like, oh, I really don't want to end up in some situation. You know, it's like almost like you kind of like shudder away from a certain type of seeing something that you really don't want to be. And I think that can work both ways. Like it can work in a way where we see carnists, like, you know, waving bacon in vegans' faces and stuff like that. And you're like, wow, I don't want to be like a bully. But yeah, it's, you know, I guess you kind of opened my eye in a way to the fact that some people can see vegans behaving a certain way and then just get put off from wanting to be categorized in that way.
Yeah. Also, maybe in my case, I was really young, and the person that approached me was way older. So I guess there was also this feeling of being rejected by someone that was older than me because I was way younger. So that was also maybe a factor that would have been to adapt speech to depending on the age of the person.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot to be said for wanting to fit in and stuff when we're a certain age. I think there's also maybe something to be considered about. There's this social effect called I think it's called the radical flank effect. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of this idea that when we see people in a certain, let's say, a category in our minds, like you see the extremists, quote unquote, people like, you know, throwing blood on people and things like that. And then you end up meeting a vegan who's not that extreme. It might have the effect of like that person having been that way might have the effect of actually getting that person to come around to what you're saying, on the other hand, in a more ready kind of way, almost, because they kind of have a, like, you know, people will do this with like marketing strategies. Like they'll price one item like way high, and then their other one will kind of like seem more reasonable in comparison. So it's interesting to think if the people who are like the quote unquote extremists or with like very aggressive approaches, maybe they're actually helping a lot, you know, kind of, it's like a self-sacrifice.
Yeah. We also recently discussed this, that like there's the need for both activisms, probably, like the more quote unquote extreme one and the more like subtle one, because maybe the more extreme ones like plant a seed in you, right? And you wouldn't be as susceptible later towards what other vegans are saying if this plant wouldn't have been sowed, if
Yeah.
this is correct English. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. It's very poetically put. I think like, yeah, there's a need for people to kind of be jarred a little bit, like shaken out of their complacency too, when they have been living in a certain way, just ignoring the fact that like this on my plate used to be a living, breathing, sentient being.
Yeah.
You know, how do you guys actually? Let me before we go into kind of the socially, like the change in your lives, because I would love to hear about that since it's a relatively recent change. Nick, I'd like to ask you kind of how you moved toward veganism in your own right.
Yeah. Like I really didn't hear much about it, surprisingly, like until like end of last year. And I think it was just like we were having breakfast together, right? And Kino was mentioning to me like, hey, would it bother you if we left out the animal products on the table, like when you eat next to me? Like, but she mentioned it in a very like sweet and empathetic way, like not in a pushy way. And I was like, okay, yeah, of course I can do that, but like, could you help me understand a bit better, like why that would make you feel better or made you happy? And then I think about this conversation around like, what is veganism all about? Like, and I had this wrong impression before, probably, or this wrong image in my mind that it was only a diet, which is obviously wrong, right? It's way more than that. And so she helped me like understand like that this is way more than just a diet, and also like an ethical perspective and like a philosophy in a way. And so after that, like we began watching like documentaries together, like Dominion and other stuff. And yeah, basically I just thought it makes sense. Like it doesn't even make sense to switch to vegetarianism in the meantime. I just went straight for veganism. I'm not sure, keep me honest on this, how long the process took, but it was pretty like instantaneously. Like I just stopped from one day to the other, and so never touched it since then, basically.
That's so amazing. Like, you know, you didn't take baby steps, you know, it's and it's also a real testament to your open-mindedness in terms of, you know, asking like what is responsible for your feelings on this, instead of just getting defensive and reactive and that kind of thing. You know, you sought to understand. You know, it's been said that the root of love is understanding. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So I assume that, you know, when you guys went, are you guys partners, by the way? I don't want to assume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was like, I'm either gonna make it really awkward right now. But like, so when you guys go out with your friends and families and things like that, how has that gone? Like when you go out to eat, I mean.
When we go out to eat, like
Yes.
to a different place.
A restaurant or something.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
So to be fair, most of my friends were very supportive, and I normally choose the restaurant, and they're very happy to try out vegan food. And so with my friends, it's super supportive. It's more complicated at the workplace, but they try to accommodate it as well. So I can't complain too much. I think Germany in general is very receptive to vegans. We have tons of options, and all the people I've communicated with were not defensive whatsoever. I was like, okay, yeah, no problem. Just let me know where we should go. And that's normally how I handle it.
Yeah. I guess family is more difficult, right? Like in Germany, we celebrate Easter quite a lot, and usually people have like ham and bread. And just we went like to my parents, right, to celebrate Easter, and that was a bit of a mindset shift for them, that we like brought our own vegan stuff for that festivity. Like we weren't like as pushy and didn't let them have their like traditional Easter meal, but we like brought our own stuff and ate our vegan stuff. And they were actually pretty welcoming. I mean. They even said like, hey, we bought you some vegan stuff. It's there for you in the fridge and so on. So they were already like, open to it. We just sent them a brief WhatsApp before, like, hey, this is what's happening. And then this is how it went. But actually, I'm positively surprised. Like they weren't super opposed to it.
They were actually curious because your mom made like one of, I don't remember the name of the bread, like this typical German Eastern bread. And then we made it vegan, and they were like, "Ooh, that actually looks kind of nice. Can we try?" And we're like, "Yeah, of course. Like, be my guest."
Yeah, it's been said before that vegans are the only group of people that like seeing their food like sold out, or like other people to, you know, to try it or eat it instead
Yeah.
of them even. And I'm really curious about kind of the perception of veganism that you sense from people. Like when you tell them you're vegan, do they acknowledge that it's an animal rights related thing, or that it's about animals, or is there still the idea that it's kind of a diet?
As I said, in Germany, I think people understand that it is an ethical thing. I think with the people that I still have a relationship in Portugal is a bit of a different story. I think it's still very ingrained in our culture to consume animal products. And so when I say I'm vegan, even if I don't say anything else, oh, I'm vegan, I'll bring my own food. Oh, that's so pretty. And they're very defensive immediately to the word vegan. So I don't even, so I don't even know if they know if it's an ethical thing. They just straight up know.
The only misconception I've encountered is like that people sometimes say like, oh no, you can't eat that. Like when I say I'm vegan, and it's like, no, I can eat that. I just don't want to, you know, it's not
Yeah.
like a a physical problem I have that I can't eat it. It's, I don't want to, right? And this is the only misconception I've frequently like encountered at work and other occasions.
That's really funny. That last issue you brought up. I mean, I've had people even ask, you know, are beans okay, or things like that. You know, it's like, let me ask their mom if I can eat them. You know what I mean? It's like people sometimes don't get the distinction that, you know, what actually is the value-based proposition that we're making with being vegan. Interestingly enough, I've been thinking about kind of like language a little bit recently, and I wonder kind of between, you know, Portuguese versus German versus English versus, you know, I've noticed I've traveled to Turkey a fair deal with my parents being from there, and people there also seem to understand that it's more of an ethical position. When you say you're vegan, people understand, oh, he doesn't want to put animals through pain, basically. It's like kind of the way that the language kind of boils down to understand it. With English, I don't know if it's the amount of kind of like media that's just coming out of this country in general, kind of with the whole like, you know, millennium and Gen Z and stuff like that. People just, you know, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like there is still a huge perception of veganism being very much a diet. And I think something that's greatly to blame for this, and this isn't, of course, unique to the US, but is the whole like ex-vegan culture, and how much they'll say, you know, like when I was vegan, XYZ. And do you guys think it's possible to be an ex-vegan?
That's tricky. I'm inclined to say yes, because I think there's a lot of people that go through several things in their life that could influence, like either it could be a physical condition or a mental health condition, and that doesn't mean that their ethics change. Is just currently it's not a priority because their life might be in a different point. So in that way, yes. I don't believe that most of the content creators that say they were vegan were actually vegan. So for me, yes and no.
Yeah. Guess you could also come from the perspective, like if you're an ex-vegan, like you never really changed your moral system or your ethics, like you're never really vegan, but like, yeah, I agree with what you said.
I think that's a really nuanced answer. I think, you know, it's and it seems to ring very accurate. I mean, I think there are people who definitely fall into the category of misrepresenting themselves as having been vegan, and they'll even come out and say, I used to drink or eat honey still and things like that. You know, they'll talk very much in dietary terms, but I think there are people, like you were saying, who kind of just have shifts in their priorities, and they end up kind of losing sight kind of what's really important in life. I've seen it happen before where, you know, I've seen people who used to be activists go and they either, you know, they meet a new partner or something like that. And, you know, there's a pipeline kind of that you can see. Interestingly enough, I think a lot of the people who post videos about ex-veganism were kind of like raw vegan in the past.
Yeah.
There's a pipeline there.
Yeah.
But I've
It
also
also
known,
gives a lot of views. So
yeah, but I've also known raw vegans who are very committed and would never go back, back to eating animals. I mean, I've spent months raw at a time, and it's been something where I've hesitated to really even be public about it, kind of, sort of, because at least in terms of the animal rights content that I make, because I don't want to distract from the issues at hand. But I think there can be a really beautiful way of eating raw, and kind of and also being very raw with your message about animal rights. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be an either or. Same way that, like, a lot of people who are more into, like, the health stuff, like the plant-based doctors and that kind of thing, they seem to avoid talking about animals. Like, I saw this thing on plant-based news the other day where it was saying, like a doctor responds to viral social media claims or something like that. And it was a great video. The doctor was making a lot of really good points, addressing things from a very educated manner. But what kind of, like, seemed a little unsettling to me was where he said that it's like, eating meat is poor for your health, poor for um, I forget the second thing he said. It wasn't animals, though. He didn't mention animals, and he said poor for the planet, and he just put a period there.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you're forgetting someone.
Yeah.
And I think with the whole, like, plant-based messaging, this might be a little off topic, but I think there's a whole deliberate attempt to kind of just kind of almost like you're in a really shallow pool and you're trying not to come up the surface, to breathe air, and just be like, we're vegan. You know what I mean? Just like it's just kind of like barely just treading under the water. And
Yeah.
it seems like kind of like a marketing thing. In the past, I've had this philosophical issue in my head where I don't know if it's best for people to not consume animal products and not have that philosophical underpinning along with it, or if it's better to have a fewer number of people who are actually vegan, who understand, whose heart has gone through that gut-wrenching experience of empathizing, acknowledging, making amends. I really don't know.
Well, I believe something in the middle is nice, because if we make the parallel with, like, human exploitation, I would say that even if you don't believe in it, the fact that the majority of people condemn that action makes it better for the people that were exploited. So even though they might not believe that it is the right thing, for the victim, it is objectively better because they're not being put through all of that. So I would say that for the animals is the same, that it would be better if most people wouldn't consume it, even if it wouldn't be for the ethical reasons, which I don't see how it wouldn't be the case, but assuming that that would be more my stance.
I think it could be the case, though, like if it were legislated, for example, if a country outlawed import or export of animal derived things, or if they legally mandated that you couldn't trade them or things like that. I know, interestingly enough, when Donald Trump was president of the US, he passed a law called the Dog and Cat Meat or Trade Act or something like that. And he actually made it illegal, federally speaking, to exchange, trade dog and cat meat in the US. You can still kill a dog, I think, depending on the state. Different states have different rules, but at least federally speaking, it's not prohibited, to my knowledge, to kill a dog or a cat to eat them yourself, but you just can't, like, sell their meat, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, South Korea a couple of days ago has released a similar law to not be able to sell dog or cat meat anymore. If I'm not mistaken, I read that somewhere. I think,
Oh, that's great. I've been hearing
so,
some ripples coming out of there on that topic, so
yeah.
that's good to see. I'm curious. This kind of brings up a little bit of a tangential issue, but might as well get into it. I heard that I think Marc Jacobs recently announced that they weren't going to be using fur anymore.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that that's progress, or do you think that it's just like, as long as we have capitalism, one peg goes down, another one kind of like pops up, another company comes out, or another retailer just gets more popular?
in that, well, I condemn fur, and I do think like the animal fur industry is awful. But I think with the case of Marc Jacobs, it is good for the victims, for the animals that are being exploited, but they're like one of the last high fashion brands that does that. So they're just complying with what the other ones did before, because many of them have already banned it for several years. So they're just like, yeah, okay, we can do it as well. Because the customers seem to want this. So it will bring a better light to us if we also decide to ban it. So I think it was a strategical marketing movement more than an ethical one.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, for the animals, it's better objectively.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. And I just want to mention Natalie's comment. She says fur makes me cry. They're just babies. Yeah, yeah, it's tragic. And the way that, you know, not that any way of killing is good or bad, but the way that they're killed is also just like the electrocution and all that. It's gnarly. But I wonder if people, you know, it's kind of a supply and demand equation, and I wonder if people aren't just going to say, oh, this brand doesn't use it anymore, we'll just go to another brand. You know, I wonder if it actually, like, maybe the best thing we can hope for is just that it affects the social perception. Because I think as far as fur is concerned, we do have a pretty big consensus that it's cruel. And I'm not opposed to people having like a very aggressive and shamey kind of view on certain types of animal exploitation. I think that's good, and I think maybe there's a utility of single issue campaigns like anti-fur because the public bans against it. I've actually had a lot of success in some instances of outreaching with vegetarians, where something that I've found, I guess, as a little backstory is when you outreach to a vegetarian, a lot of times they'll say, oh, I'm vegetarian, I don't eat meat, I'm on your side, or something like that. And people will just jump down the throat, be like, you rape cows, you exploit cows. You know, it's like, you know, you're not on our side. And the fact is, like, they've just kind of expressed a little bit of a vulnerability to you. You know, they've divulged something about themselves. They're kind of in some ways on a path in some way.
Yeah.
Now you could say that they're actually just fake animal defenders and that kind of thing. But, you know, if you kind of just weigh their conscience against their behavior, they're kind of on a path a little bit to some extent. They've taken some step. They've actually become willing to identify with vegans and vegetarians, you know, because that's what society does. They clump us in a corner. They say, like, these bleeding heart people. I think in that moment, going back to the outreach, when they've expressed to you that they're vegetarian, the worst thing you can do at that point is say, how about dairy? You know, like, do you know what happens to those cows? You're still raping cows. Like, at that point, I think it's really important to try to get a philosophical grasp on what underpins their moral system. And I think one thing that we can ask them is actually about fur. We can say, how do you feel about fur? Because I think they'd be against it. And then if we explore the reasons why they're against fur, I think we can kind of be like, okay, so it hurts animals. That's one element. And the second element is it's unnecessary. And then we draw it back to the dairy issue.
Yeah, then I agree with you that, like, I mean, we don't do outreach, or maybe you're better versed in this than we are, but I think it could help make the bridge. I know a lot of people that are not necessarily against fur, but the use of animals in circus. And that's why many circuses also ban the use of animals for entertainment or bullfights or bull races.
That's a great example.
Yeah, so the fact that they're against that shows that they do have empathy for animals and they do feel that this is exploitation. And then you can maybe make the bridge. Okay, but like animal industry is kind of the same.
Yeah, that's another great example. I think it's so important for us to focus on those key industries or aspects of exploitation that are completely uncontroversial. Anytime you don't have consensus among vegans, since we're such a passionate group of people, it's going to kind of come back and bite us, you know, in one way or another. For example, if we were to use the example of animal testing, there would be vegans who would say that we should animal test for certain types of drugs, or we should consume certain things that were tested on animals. But I think, you know, those key issues are really kind of like almost like cornerstone kind of issues.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned your lack of outreach experience. Do you guys have any plans for incorporating that like into your channel at all or into your lives at all?
I'm very shy. I try to do volunteering kind of in a different way. So there's vegan hacktivists, and there's tons of like things you can do. And I work with a sanctuary, and I am trying to help them build their website and all of that. And that's more my type of activism. And the YouTube channel, talking to people, frightens me.
I don't think we ruled it out, right? It's just like taking step by step. The channel is very new, right? And we started with more informational videos, coming on to interviews, having interviews on our channel and so on. And yeah, maybe will happen in the future. I think it's interesting, but like at the moment, not yet.
He's clearly our PR.
I mean, outreach is a big step. I know, like
Yeah.
when I look at videos of myself doing outreach in the past, you know, I didn't have a good compass on it. Like I didn't have the right mentality to get into it. I think that now also we have so many people who are showing, you know, good examples of how to do outreach that it's really it's getting easier. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the channel Debug Your Brain, but
Yeah.
Justin, who runs that, he actually kind of like breaks it down almost into a play-by-play, and that kind of, you know, helps a lot to kind of understand where you're going to need to pivot in certain ways, or how you're going to need to kind of absorb some things and then kind of respond in a way. But yeah, outreach is definitely something that requires a certain, it doesn't require anything that anybody intrinsically lacks. So I don't want to say it's like, I'm not saying that some people are cut out for it or not, but it's definitely a practice that you need to kind of hone. One thing that I found really helpful is before I got really confident doing outreach, is just being part of the, let's say like at a Cube of Truth, for example, like part of the people holding the screen. In that sense, you get, or in that situation, you get to kind of be the listener and kind of be right there and just say, okay, how hard would it be for me to just step 4 feet this way and be in this person's shoes doing outreach and just respond to these things. But I think a lot of it has to do also with developing a sense of patience when people are kind of belligerent and trolly and things like that. I mean, there's been times when I've wanted to like push my screen over, you know, when I see different outreach and things like that. So it's a process for sure. And I think, you know, with you guys being so new to veganism, it's really great at this point for you guys just to be kind of absorbing and learning and kind of growing into your specific niche. I think it's so amazing that you're already, you know, reaching out in the world and making a difference, because a lot of people, you know, they'll go vegan, but they'll be kind of wishy-washy about it. But the fact that you guys are actually actively doing stuff is a testament to your commitment toward it.
Thank
you. Yeah, I kind of, you know, I felt the way that what you were talking about with not wanting to declare yourself vegan until you had actually committed, Ken. I felt that way when I got my first tattoo and it says vegan. And I was like, I wouldn't want something, you know, inked on my skin without being very sure. That's what I would have wanted. So I think it's really great when we kind of like initiate ourselves in a way. And by making this channel and, you know, taking on the other responsibilities that you guys mentioned, you did that, you know, that self-initiation. There's this idea in yoga too. It's like nobody can initiate you into being like that inspired leader. You know, you have to initiate yourself. So that's really beautiful. Totally. I'm really curious about like the different kinds of social issues that you see Germany kind of that you see percolating within Germany. Do you find that veganism is something that's viewed as very aligned with certain things, or are you finding some movements are like kind of rejecting the idea of veganism, or have you guys kind of gotten to put your finger on those pulses at all?
You maybe notice better.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it's similar in the US. I don't really know, but like I feel like being vegan is often considered as being more on the spectrum of left political standpoints, and like being more conservative is often people who are like more opposed to the idea of veganism or being plant-based. That's like in my personal experience, what a lot of people have mirrored to me, like, or what I've seen in my personal experience, if people tend to be more conservative in their political viewpoints, that they seem to be less open to that. I don't know what the reason for that is. I don't have all of the information, but like, yeah, that's definitely, I think, topic of a discussion in the society. But I feel like, as Keen has also mentioned, Germany is pretty far when it comes to acknowledging veganism as like a moral standpoint, or you see that like in supermarkets with the products, but you also see it just in the media and the way how common it is in cities like Munich or Berlin, for example. So yeah, I hope this gave a little bit of a nuanced
I think I would
answer
just
to that.
add one thing. I think what I see in Germany in terms of intersectionality is between more like veganism and human exploitation. So vegan products also tend to be, and it's locally produced in Germany, and it's like ingredients that were also extracted from here. Meet our team and our meet our team page. So they try to be more sustainable ethically in terms of human rights as well. So in that sense, it seems to be an overlap, but with other movements, I'm not entirely sure.
That's so interesting because in the US, it's kind of the opposite. The whole like the local thing seems to be very dominated by the carnistic people. You know, they'll talk about how your avocados had to travel 3,000 miles. You know, do you know how much fossil fuels that burns? And they'll try to kind of turn all those environmental talking points on their head against vegans. But they'll say like, you know, I just go down the street to my local butcher who works with a local farm, and they'll talk about how animals can be raised anywhere. So they, you know, are more, are I guess less transportation intensive because, you know, they can be murdered anywhere basically. You know, they don't say murdered, of course, but you know, we're often guilted for things like avocados, as I mentioned, or quinoa, you know, tofu. And of course, it couldn't be more misguided to think that vegans are consuming most of the soybeans. Something that I wanted to mention about what Nick brought up about the tendency of veganism to be more aligned with leftism is from what I've noticed. So in the US, we kind of have an interesting dynamic going on where if you look at a map and, you know, you put red for Republican and blue for Democrat, and of course, there's many ways. You know, I don't consider myself either. So there's many ways to be on either side without belonging to either party. Excuse me. But you basically have this map of red. The whole map is red. And then the big cities are the ones that are blue. So basically, like, you can't see a sizable cluster of blue without being able to say like, oh, that's Portland. Oh, that's Chicago. Oh, that's New York. You know, like the big cities are the ones. So this is something that Republicans will often claim, is that they'll be like, you know, they'll show a map and they'll be like, by total area, 90 something percent of the country is red. Of course, when you look at population, that's a different question because, like I said, these are like the big population centers that tend to be more overwhelmingly Democratic. I'm not sure what the largest population center is that would go red, but maybe somewhere in like Indiana, maybe Nashville and Tennessee, but they're a lot less populous than like the big ones. You know, LA, New York, Chicago are consistently blue. Something that's interesting to note is that in these vastly red areas, like in the South, for example, the South of the US, you know, it's called the Bible Belt. It's very conservative, like religious conservative types of people. And then there's very low racial diversity in those areas too. You'll find that the people who are vegan are actually the more leftist or like left-leaning liberal type people. And they're kind of like I don't know if this is a vegan term, but like the black sheep. I think it is, you know, like the odd one out. And it's more the case that in the big cities, you'll find more quote unquote conservative vegans. It's almost like it's I don't know what's responsible for this, but you know, my partner, she's from Alabama, and that's like in the deep South. And you know, I spent several months there, and the vegans who I met, I mean, I didn't meet many, but all the vegans who I met were very like, you know, left vibes. Whereas when she came up here, she was like kind of like, wow, like you guys have like some, you know, Republican vegans here, like some, you know, conservative vegans here. And she's like, I had never encountered a vegan like that in all my years in the South, going to different vegan meetups, events, things like that. But somehow you come up to Chicago, which is in like the deepest, Illinois is one of the deepest blue states you can think of. It's almost like these people somehow are able to find community within the comfort of being in a democratic place. It's
Yeah.
it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know. I don't know like what the cause of that could possibly be, but
Yeah.
I think because left in general might be associated with movements or ethical movements, and then it tends to be people on the left that are associated with, I don't know, also with feminism or human rights and animal rights. I think it falls in the same category, but that doesn't mean anything regarding what you believe politically in terms of like, should there be more state, should it be less state? And I think those are very separate issues, but it tends to be the left that has more of this overlap between the social movements.
I'm sorry. I just missed that one word. You said, should there be more or less state?
Yeah, in the sense like, I mean, I don't know exactly, like, I don't think in the States it's exactly like that, but in Europe, when we say left and right, is like if we should be more capitalist, or if we should like the state should be more social, and if we should
Got
involve
it.
more of the state, and that's what I meant.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
I think also maybe part of it might be kind of, as you're saying, you know, the people who are more left-leaning maybe are more interested in human rights causes, and they find themselves in just a sea of people, like as far as, you know, very conservative areas are concerned, where they want to speak up and stand out and not kind of go along the whole domination mentality. So a lot of these ideologies that they have are kind of very much aligned, you know, supporting women's rights, supporting LGBTQ rights, racial equality, and animal rights as well. Whereas I think maybe in a big city, you just have so many people that if there is somebody who's interested in veganism and animal rights, they look up stuff about it and they go join those kinds of events and groups, and says nothing about any of their other views. And even if they might not be extremely, you know, so far toward that right-wing angle that they just have to be around people who are like that, they might still have the vestiges of those views, or even actively hold those views in their big, you know, left-wing city.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that's kind of it's a kind of nuanced topic, and the topic of intersectionality came up a little bit there, and it's something that I've been exploring recently. And I had responded to a video by channel Roger Yates, where he had talked about the vegan movement kind of being taken over by quote unquote animals only vegans. And he was positing that the founders of the vegan movement were very much concerned with the vegan movement being a step toward kind of like the evolution of humanity and kind of peace among humanity. And he had posited that basically vegans who hold like right-wing or conservative beliefs must acknowledge that they're out of step with veganism in their other views that they hold. It's a really interesting topic. I don't want to dissuade anybody from leaving animals off their plate.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is, a racist, transphobe, sexist, bigoted, et cetera, person, and they're living in, their barn and whatever place, and they have this epiphany that they shouldn't exploit other animals.
Mm-hmm.
As unlikely as that may sound, if they just one day look at the piece of cow or pig on their plate and say, like, this is just disgusting to me, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
do this anymore, and they look into plant-based nutrition and don't even look into veganism, don't become one of those people, quote unquote, even if that's the only change that they make, I would see that as progress toward a better world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Progress, obviously they wouldn't be a good example of like you know a, a, a shining beacon of social change and progress, but if they leave non-human animals off their plate, that's even just that, just going plant-based, as we were talking about earlier, about how we would kind of weigh out the motivation behind an action versus the consequence of it. The consequence of it is kind of the same as somebody going
Mm-hmm.
vegan and not eating animals for that reason.
For sure. Could you briefly explain like what this person meant specifically by the animal only vegans? I didn't get that part, to be
Sure,
honest.
sure. So there's this idea among some vegans that, well, I guess let me bring up this comment from Lewis, might help to guide this. So he says, veganism is exclusively about others, other than human animals. It kind of makes sense. Other, like other.
Mm-hmm.
Should vegans also support human rights aside from veganism? Of course. So there's also, Lewis is kind of showing that somebody can view veganism as pertaining to non-human animals only and still not
Mm-hmm.
be bigoted when it comes to the other views. Like, they can still have very, dare I say, progressive views that that don't involve making veganism, or that doesn't involve making veganism about those things as well.
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated topic, and intersectionality in veganism is complicated. It's not that we can't apply the same principles and empathy that we apply to animals to other social causes. Is that I think, I don't know, my opinion might be misinformed, but I feel like if veganism, the definition is about reducing and respecting animals and giving animal rights,
Yeah.
then that's what this movement is about. That doesn't mean that I can't be vegan and feminist and pro LGBT and pro this and that and that and that. You can be all of those things or just some of them. And I just think if there is a word with a certain definition, that's what it portrays and that's what it refers to. And we can talk about expanding it to other movements, but I think each movement has its own social cause.
I absolutely agree. I think there are times when you'll meet vegans who aren't quite there with some aspect of human rights,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean that they're not vegan.
Yeah, agree.
There's this idea, to bring back yoga again, there's this idea that you don't have to be perfect to practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, practice makes perfect, but you don't have to be perfect to practice. I think
Yeah.
veganism is the same way. If somebody is at a point where they're willing to take on a vegan label,
Mm-hmm.
that we shouldn't be like, all right, so let's see here, and kind of like go through a list of all their views and try to make sure that everything is completely in accordance with the tenets of
Mm-hmm.
non-exploitation. Because I think what happens is when we make it about that, we make the conversation on things like outreach so much more difficult for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because then the person's like, okay, well, what about your shoes? And you're like, yeah, I bought these. I don't know who made them. Like, okay, so
Yeah.
you possibly contributed child exploitation, and all that follows, makes it very
Mm-hmm.
difficult, because I guess, let me rewind. One of your principal things that you're trying to do on outreach is basically show that person their hypocrisy. And it's
Yeah.
not to call them out and make them feel ashamed, but it's to just show them, like, hey, something you're doing is not in line with your own values.
Mhm.
And what could be a better comeback from the people who you're outreaching, you know, if they're not intent on taking animals sentience in their lives, etc., seriously, than to say, well, you're a hypocrite too, and basically, you know, push you into the same corner.
Yeah.
And then there's no progress coming out of that kind of situation.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly who said this. I think it was a content creator as well. Like, this doesn't happen with other social movements. You wouldn't go to a feminist protest and be like, yeah, but are you pro gay rights? Like, those two are not necessarily, yeah, we can have empathy for those things as well, but you wouldn't contradict this person's rights to protest or pro or against something because they're not pro or against something else. So I think, like, with veganism, we're just the target. Yeah, but what about these other things and these other social movements that you should also care for or about?
Yeah, I totally get it. I think I almost dare to say that maybe the intersectional issue is actually something that I hope that there can be some growth in terms of the intersectional movement, quote unquote, taking animal rights more seriously. Because I think that's a lot of the issue, because a lot of the outrage, like, you know, a lot of right-wing politics tends to be very reactionary in nature. And I think, you know, we see a mirror image of that with a lot of times intersectionals being very reactionary and like almost kind of like welfarist in a way, because they're not thinking about like principles and tenets and holistic education kind of stuff. But I think like the people who are the intersectional vegans, I think are hopefully, I don't know if this is something that I'm just like totally off base on. I'm totally open to that, but I'm thinking that maybe we're at a point where slowly those people are starting to take veganism and animal rights just a little bit more seriously, enough to the point where their demands, I guess, of the world at large are getting a little bit more honed, possibly. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving credit where it isn't due. I'm not sure. But
it's a positive view on the world. I agree. And I mean, we have seen some progress not that long ago. The UK banned the transportation of livestock. Like, so that was progress. Now we saw recently that was it Aldi or Lidl that so there's like tiers in terms of like the animal condition, like in the animal industry, and now they're pointing on, oh, we only sell these top tiers, which is still objectively wrong, but they're playing on this, that there is more social consciousness within the public about how animals are treated, and they're playing a bit into that. So I think there is some progress, that people are more aware and they care more about animal rights.
That's an interesting observation. You know, I think that something I've noticed is when I'm doing outreach in a more kind of like left wing, like, or like hipstery kind of pocket locally, the people I encounter, like, you know, it tends to be younger people, and they tend to be very kind of over veganism. Like, they tend to kind of have like a jaded view of it, like, yeah, my roommate's vegan, like, you know, it doesn't work for me, something like that. And it's just like their mind is made up. They're very, very, very knowledgeable about it. And those are the interactions like that I find extremely triggering, like angering. Like after outreaching in that kind of environment, I feel kind of like more angry. Like, wow, I thought that people weren't aware of a lot of these things, but now I'm finding that some people are just like shit people. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things with outreach is that we kind of make people into bad people in a way, because if you you know, there's that whole idea, like, when you know better, you do better, and if you don't know better, you can't be held responsible for yeah. I hesitated to say holding accountable. That's a whole nother thing, because I won't get into it, but anyway, that term is under scrutiny, holding non-vegans accountable currently, because it seems to, no, not by me, but it seems to imply some kind of maybe like aggression that is
Mm.
not to be. I'm just going back to that video that Roger Yates had made, and I had responded to a comment there, etc. But and I hope that I can talk with him more about it, because he's I don't mean to throw any shade. I think he's an amazing activist, and he's been vegan for so long, and it's really awesome to be able to have people educating us about the history of this movement.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, I think like what I was saying about people turning into bad people is that a lot of times they haven't considered those things, and when we talk to them and get their views out in the open, they have to kind of like double down or kind of like acknowledge and then defend something, because there's this idea, with the cognitive dissonance, either you change your behavior to
Mm-hmm.
match your idea of yourself, or you change your morals to be like, I am okay with causing unthinkable atrocities to animals for
Mm-hmm.
its pleasure.
Yeah.
Because we ask these questions and we get to the core of it, and then they're like, oh shoot, like I have no, we run name the trait and all this stuff, and they have, if somebody has no way out, then they have to acknowledge that. I'm curious about your thoughts. So we talked a little bit about like the single issue and like the single issue stuff where banning fur is concerned, or like live exports or exports, things like that. And like the public perception. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of, I'm sure you are, like there's high welfare type things that some vegans will work on promoting, where they'll like there's events here in Chicago that try to hold restaurants accountable to their promises of free range or that kind of thing. So like there's a group that I think it was maybe Chipotle. They were protesting, or they planned to protest against Chipotle for supposedly having made a promise to go cage free by a certain year. Do you think that that's something that we should be doing? Like, do you think that that's helpful, or do you think that that's something that we should avoid because it sends a terrible message, or maybe reinforces even the property status of animals?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Probably also a difficult question. But,
yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I think
if you don't have an answer, I totally can respect that too.
I think it's definitely worth calling out. I'm not sure how it is in the US again, but in Germany, like those terms like cage free, free range, and so on, they are not like strictly defined. So they can basically mean anything, and free range is not necessarily better, at least in Europe, to my knowledge, to some of the cage free stuff and other labels. So I think there has to be education definitely from the vegan movement about what do those labels even mean? Are they even helpful? And also, if companies make false claims, I think this should be like called out to the public, and people should be made aware of that. So I think, and again, I'm not aware of that Chipotle case specifically, but I think it's a first step to inform at least the public about if there are any false claims made and how helpful those labels like cage free, free range, and so on are even, or is it objectively anyways wrong what we do to animals as a whole. And so I think there's definitely a lack of awareness in the public, at least in here in Europe, about what those labels mean in supermarkets.
Yeah, Nick, I think you touched on an amazing issue there. Very, very astute observation that there needs to be part of that conversation needs to be about how meaningful these labels are. And, I think that if the people who are doing the activism against Chipotle, for example, and trying to hold them to the cage-free promise, if they're making part of their activism include messaging about how all of it's just unnecessary and shouldn't exist, and how we need a plant-based food system, that's totally different and great. I don't know if that's what's being done. It could be, but it could also just be that they're sticking very much to the issue and just trying to push through that specific demand, as in making it an issue of doing better versus stopping the doing, you know? So that's a really great observation. I do think there's a lot of value though, in the first part of what you said about holding them to their word about, you know, what they say that they're doing. I think a lot of people aren't aware of the gravity of, like, you know, as Kin was saying earlier, you know, and as I kind of alluded to earlier when I was talking about looking at the dairy footage, we don't really grapple with what we're doing until we kind of like see it or confront it. And if somebody is willing to look at how the standard practices go, especially, I think that goes a huge way. However, it can kind of go a different way where, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, there was an investigation for things called Fair Oaks Farms. It's called Fairlife. It's like just a milk brand that it used to have a very clean image until there was an investigation about its practices, and there were just horrible things being done to baby calves and things like that. And when I say things, I'm not referring to animals, just like horrible things and things like that happening. And people stopped buying it for a while, and maybe some people still avoid it. So now, basically, the fact that this milk brand is called Fair Life, you know, so it's like, it's basically giving people the image of fairness and welfare, and people who are concerned about those things yet who still buy cow's milk avoid that brand many a time because of that investigation that came out. And, you know, they may in turn be buying something that could potentially involve worse treatment, or just buying, you know, a different brand that involves the same kind of treatment. And I don't know if it had the effect of sending the message that it's all unjust to be using cows. I think there's something to be said for the fact that some people just see the footage, like, you know, what happened in your case and in Nick's case, is, you know, you guys saw the footage, and, you know, he saw it and he didn't go vegetarian or take half steps. Like, there's a saying that some people make excuses for what's happening in the footage, and some people see it and they say, I want nothing to do with this, and just find a way to not participate in it anymore at all.
Yeah, maybe this is a very naive claim for me, but I think in my perception of reality, people do care about animals, and that's why there is an increase of like free range meat and free range eggs and grass fed something, and this tier system that we have in Germany, and people are like, oh, I only buy number 4. I think it's the best. Yeah. So it seems that people are concerned, and they think that the way these animals are processed are better in some way, and it's not brutal or cruel. So in some way, if people were confronted with the reality, then it would be different. I think there's also, I mean, I speak more in Portugal. There's this cognitive dissonance because a lot of people not that long ago, when we had a dictatorship, had a lot of animals, and the treatment of animals like backyard sheep and cows is very different from what it is now that it is an industrialized industry. And so people still think that the way they treat their own animals, or they treated their own animals, is how the industry does with these animals as well. And it's not at all the same. And sometimes there's this disparity that maybe they haven't been confronted with that reality yet.
Yeah. This reminds me of, like, we were visiting sanctuary recently, and like the person owning that sanctuary made a really like great point. He said like he doesn't understand like the cognitive dissonance, and some people, when he sees, for example, a young couple in love, like he's happy for them, right? He wants them to enjoy life and is happy for seeing them happy. But then we make this shift when it comes to animals. Like, we buy animals that were happy, but like they didn't want to die, right? But he made this claim, like, you wouldn't eat the couple just because they're happy. That's the cognitive dissonance we have, like, and that I found it really like fitting somehow.
That's so true. You know, I've said before, there's like an inverse relationship between an animal's level of happiness and their desire to die.
Yeah.
If they're suffering like crazy, it's presumable that they may want to see an end to their life.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're enjoying their life, then that's like a worse betrayal. If they've known nothing but love, to then think that you're going to send them to a slaughterhouse, it's just heartbreaking and such a betrayal.
Yeah.
Also because many of these animals trust the farmer because they've seen them every day. This is the person that takes care of them. And then there's some slaughter, sometimes workers that say, oh, but they willingly go there. No, they don't. They just know you and they trust you. And now you just betrayed them completely. So in some ways, it's just worse.
Yeah, I think this is so important that we're talking about this, because there's often a lot of focus, especially from kind of like bigger YouTubers. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic. He is a quote unquote ex-vegan. And even like while he was vegan, he would focus a lot on this idea of factory farming being kind of like the big ill that we need to confront and improve or eradicate. But the fact of the matter is, even in a situation where factory farming is abolished, if we have people locally enslaving animals, exploiting them, and killing them, it's still it's a great moral atrocity, and it's a world that I fear having to grapple with, where the industry improves their, let's say, their practices and the perception. Are they gonna be harder to get people to take a position against, because it's just the animals are getting massages and going to sleep and that kind of thing, then how do we convince people to value, at least, what I value would be the intrinsic value of the animals. Like, so philosophically speaking, I think that plants have extrinsic value. I don't think that plants have intrinsic value. Like, I know it sounds kind of like very like anti-spiritual and things like that. I mean, I love working with, different herbs and stuff like that, health supplements, things like that. Like, I'm a big fan of all that. I see great value in a lot of different herbs, not just for our health, but for beautification of the world, or different ecological purposes. But I think all of those things are purposes. I don't think that plants have intrinsic value. And what I think gives anyone intrinsic value is personhood. So I see personhood requiring being the subject of an experience, like a fish, an ant, a gerbil, whatever. They all have someone inside. Whereas I think that even if a tree could potentially have the ability to sense things around them, and even if a tree could potentially have the ability to sense certain stimuli as threatening or unthreatening, I still reject the idea that there is someone inside. I could be wrong about this. I mean, maybe, 1,000 years from now, people will be watching this and they'll say, see, even those vegans were speciesist against the plant kingdom. And here's Haas vegan. And if there was ever a statue of me, they'll strike it down, because they'll say, see, he rejected plant sentience. But that's how I derive my understanding of value. I just talk about intrinsic and extrinsic value. I think that this is something that we can bring up in outreach a lot, where we just talk about what gives someone value. I think it was Debug Your Brain, Justin. I think he had this line of reasoning that he would use, where, like, a line of questioning rather, where he would ask, is it wrong to punch a pig? I think that's the one he would start with. And then he would kind of go down from that into more kind of honing in questions, where he'd ask about, well, what if it gives somebody a lot of pleasure? Or what if the pig can't stop you, or something like that, and basically would try to get to the person's values and try to figure out what they value. So I think a lot of the issue is just kind of confronting what people value. I know, like, on the topic of lab grown meat, this comes up a lot, where you'll have some vegans who will say that the flesh, like the DNA that it's made from, even if that doesn't involve harming an animal, if it's just like a found feather or a found piece of fur that's used, and just to assume that it's being done without any kind of bovine growth serum kind of stuff, or any animal derived serums. I've heard it posited before by vegans that there's still a kind of harm in that animal's DNA is being used, that they're being exploited, and that kind of that there's this sense of, or idea rather, of an unexperienced harm. The concept of an unexperienced harm comes up. And I don't know if I totally agree that. I mean, I can understand the idea of an unexperienced harm in the sense of if there's a sentient being and they're rendered unconscious and then they're being harmed, harmful things are being done to them, whether it's doing something to them against their will, etc., violating their bodily autonomy. Totally get the lack of ethics, in that situation. But I don't know if taking, found feathers is doing harm to that being, oh my God, the world is seeing this cow as a food commodity. I don't think it's that personal to that cow. Like, I don't think they would even have a concept of it. And I don't think that even if they did have a concept of it, I don't think that the world would focus in, like, unless this cow was put like in a cage somewhere and everybody like went to go gawk at them and be like, this is who we're eating. Everybody, like, we're just eating this cow now. I just don't see that. I know that the idea of lab-grown meat still does, to some extent, perpetuate the idea that other animals are food. I'm more inclined to think that if it would have the effect of saving millions or billions of animals from being bred into existence only to be violently slaughtered, that it's worth it. So I don't know. I think what I would adopt would kind of be a it's weird because it's kind of like a threshold deontology thing where you say, I have this principle, and yes, this would violate that principle. However, the outcome, the consequence is so crazily better that, that threshold kind of passes you into more utilitarian thinking. But I think there's also some kind of virtue element there too, where you're just like, valuing compassion or making nonviolence such a strong virtue that you're saying this is going to be able to prevent so much violence.
Yeah. Agreed. So I think the lab-grown meat topic is a bit also, like, as you said, controversial for many reasons. And I don't necessarily think it's necessary. Like, we don't need lab-grown meat to sustain ourselves. But I do see it as you, that it's a great channel in a way to make people not consume more animals, and then all of the sentient beings don't have to go through this awful industry and this awful life that just end up in a plate. So there's the thing in terms of sentience, it's where do you draw the line? So if I drew blood and then put it on a plate and someone ate it, is that violating my autonomy? I mean, there's my DNA, it's my thing, but it's not me anymore, and it's not my experience, and it's not a sentient being just because it has my cells or my DNA. It's the same with the bacteria in your gut. I mean, you're also killing the bacteria, but they're not sentient. So it's always, okay, where do you draw the line for a bacteria or for cells or for DNA? Because those are not the same as being a sentient conscious being, or to me. And maybe I come too much from science and not too much from a moral, ethical, like more spiritual standpoint, where every living thing deserves to continue to exist, even if it's a bacteria.
I think people, and Nick, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on it. I just want to say, on the topic of drawing your own blood, I think that people would maybe make that a matter of consent
Mhm.
if they would say that, you know, you can draw your own blood. But yeah, Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would also agree. Like personally, for me, it wouldn't be like in theory if you could produce like lab-grown meat without causing any sort of animal suffering, as you mentioned, like with finding a loose feather or something, and we could grow lab-grown meat from that. Like amazing, I think. If it reduces like animal suffering, if people can't live for whatever reason without the taste and choose this alternative instead of killing an animal for it, I'm all for it. I think it's similar actually to, even though I respect, of course, the other opinion, and I might like change my opinion in the future when I have more information on this about something I don't understand at the moment.
Sure.
But I think it's similar to like secondhand leather, for example, where like I personally wouldn't have like a problem using it, even though I totally understand and respect the opinion of other vegans that say like, hey, you don't want to portray this image of like wearing animal skin is a good thing to do. But I think like from the lens of like you wouldn't finance any company for that. The harm has already been done. You don't cause more harm, in my personal opinion, to the animal by using something and not trashing it. So I think that's similar in that regard that I would support that.
I think part of the issue with the lab grown meat question is that, you know, it's one of those things where it's kind of like you know that it's like a trolley problem. You know that the train is coming. You know, it's that you know that people are going to keep buying animal flesh. You know what I mean? So if you're able to give them something that doesn't require murdering more sentient beings, it's not that you're selling the animals short. It's that you're saying there's this crazy train coming toward them. Like let's at least try to put a cap on the one, like, you know, something limiting on the ones being bred, you know, who are going to just get swallowed or crushed by that train. I think an interesting thing that I would want to ask Nick is your views on dumpster diving.
So being a freegan.
or just, you know, if let's say you're at work and they order a pizza and certain number of people eat the pizza, but there's just a few slices left over, and it goes in the trash, but it's not like in the trash. It's just like it's there, and you can open the box, and you know that it's all just going to rot and go moldy and stuff within a few days. Do you think that there would be any ethical issue with the consumption of that cheese pizza?
I mean, for vegans, I would say yes. Like, I personally wouldn't eat it probably. However, I would try to find a way to not let the food go to waste by, for example, offering it to a person who eats meat and hasn't made the decision to become vegan. Like, I think it's better to use resources than to let them go to waste. However, like if you are vegan and consider yourself vegan, I personally wouldn't eat it probably.
It's difficult because, you know, I've struggled with this. You know, I want to send the message to people that other animals aren't resources. But there have been times when, like, let's say I'll get like Chinese food and they'll mess up my order. In a tofu fried rice, they'll put egg in it, for example. And I've already driven home. Like, you know, I'm not going to drive back 30, 40 minutes to take this food back, and I'm not going to eat it. And, you know, I don't want to call someone, you know, if I have a neighbor who does eat animals, I don't want to, I want to keep trying to influence them in whatever marginal way I can to go vegan, to stop viewing animals as property. It's really difficult. I mean, a recent time, that the time when that happened most recently, I went out on the street and found a houseless person to get, and gave it to them. And, you know, that person couldn't care less if it had egg in it or not, you know? But, you know, it's still kind of like, I don't know if it's different when it's somebody that you know, who you're kind of like trying to get to see your way more, because it's almost like you're kind of having like a low expectation of them and saying like, well, like, I know you'll eat this kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't know if there is. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult.
Do you think this could be an opportunity though for you to do outreach or like have a conversation with them, like you telling them like why you don't want to eat it, but like asking them if they would be open to have it and use that to influence them?
I'm inclined to say that no, because like, I'd be basically saying like, this required so much cruelty and this many chicks had to die for it and things like that, and then just be like, here you go.
Here's food. Yeah, I think that's the issue with when a restaurant mess up your order, or there's leftover food at the office because someone ordered and didn't ate everything. And when you give that food to someone else because you yourself wouldn't eat it, it's just transferring the moral problem to someone else. I think that's the issue. So I think because vegans don't want to waste food, because we also understand that people are starving, and it would just feel wasteful and disrespectful to throw perfectly good food. But it's very complicated because from what I know, like the food waste problem is not necessarily on the individual level, but on the way we structure our chain of food processing and grow and everything that goes to waste for absolutely no good reason. So I'm not sure, like I wouldn't eat it, and giving it to someone else to me just feels like, okay, now the problem is yours. This is like your moral issue now. So yeah.
I think there is something to be said for the fact that it could reduce demand for those things. I think that's kind of like a common thread between the lab grown meat technology and the like donating food or like dumpster diving kind of thing, is that potentially it could have the purpose of reducing the demand for animal products, and even going vegan and trying to create more vegans, create more activists. I understand that we're trying to make social change and we're trying to change people's attitudes and not view animals as resources, but it's kind of like what it all comes down to as far as the practical effect is that we're reducing demand to a point where governments basically and stores and supply chains will hopefully look at what they're producing and see that nobody's buying it. That's, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the ideal outcome for people to not, to not be forced and legislated into not buying or producing flesh from animals or byproducts, secretions, excretions, but just deciding that it's not worth what's being done to those animals. So in a way, like I have, we talked about welfareism a little bit and the idea of like the cage free and different tiers of treatment, but I tend to have a little bit more of a sympathetic view toward the reducitarian approach than I do to the welfarist approach, because I see the reducitarian approach ending in veganism, and contributing and being aligned with it, because we're kind of like I said, just reducing the demand to the point where it becomes obsolete. Whereas I think with welfareism, we kind of can run into an issue more where people are motivated to buy things that they think are kinder to animals. And, like I said, there's this horror scenario in my head about how things can get to a point where everything is so humane washed that our job of achieving animal liberation from being put in these oppressive scenarios and living such lives is so much more difficult. Do you guys have any thoughts on that with like, I guess there's like soft approaches, like there's the welfareism, reducitarianism.
Yeah, I'm also maybe in controversy also to many vegans. I also think reducitarianism is the way to go. Maybe the way Nick did it, which even though it's very great, maybe won't fit everyone. And if someone is dedicated, that's the end goal. And I think that's the focus here. Is not just, oh, let's all aim to meet once a week. It's no. The end goal is none. And then the way we get there might be different. And as long as you're reducing, I would agree that that's the right way and the right path. Even though you're not there yet, you're not at the finish line, you're getting there. And I think that's my points.
Yeah. I think there's a way to conceptualize reducitarianism as vegans where we're not seeing that as something that we should advocate for, but we're seeing that as an aligned type of progress. Like, if I were doing outreach and somebody was saying, well, how about this? I'll agree to do meatless Mondays, or I'll agree to do vegan Mondays, just so we're clear that it's a clear reducing, not just like buying other animal stuff, but if they say I'm vegan on Mondays, or I'll be vegan during the week, and then on the weekends I'll go exploit animals. We're not going to tell them like, okay, great, that kind of thing. But but we can still in our minds be like, that's some kind of progress, without condoning it. I think what was I going to say with regard to the reducitarian issue? I had a point to make there. But we don't want to advocate for it. I was going to say that when people are grappling with this idea of going vegan, they're already kind of like being confronted with this philosophy. If you present it, here's what it was. You're presenting it to them accurately. And then basically, if they go to the grocery store, they're more likely to be thinking about animals in the first place. I mean, when you look at like human psychology, different social psych experiments, outcomes have shown that around mealtime, people actually tend to think about the animals they're eating even less. And they tend to want to block out ideas of the animals that they're eating even less. Like, this is something as simple as like, if you just had a picture of a happy pig in a sanctuary and you just held it up to somebody before, like, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. or something like that, when they're about to eat lunch, if you show it to them, or when they just had lunch, either or, they're more likely to somehow be averse to that and not want to look at it, not want to think about that animal. So I think when we make these good, not attempts, but like, when we put the best foot of veganism forward, people already are inclined to do or to not animal friendly things, but I guess to have some kind of thought process that puts animals into their consideration to some regard, to some degree. And I think like they're going to do those reducitarian things if they listen to us anyway. Unless we just hit them so clearly to make a connection where they just say, wow, I'm vegan from now on, kind of a thing. I think that's already logical consequence. So I think what we're both kind of zeroing in on to have as a major point of agreement is that we don't need to advocate for reducitarianism, because that's kind of what people do anyway.
No, not at all. My point was not advocating for reducitarianism, is more,
of course,
not I feel like if people say like, oh, I'm already reducing, and then we're like, well, but that's not enough. And like, it's very confrontational. People will also be more defensive towards listening to the rest. But of course, I think we should make clear, like, this is why we're doing it this way. This is what we stand for. You probably share the same values. So let's like try to figure out a way to get there. But as I said, like, we don't do outreach, and then maybe that's the issue, because it's a very slippery slope with reducitarianism, because it can excuse behavior. It's like, oh, but I already do meatless Monday, so that's fine. I'm better than 80% of people. This is a random number, and that's the problem here, that it could go into this path of like excusing certain behaviors and excusing animal exploitation because you just do it certain times in the week. So
yeah, and I think it also is a sneaky way. And I don't know if it's something anybody does consciously, but it kind of makes it more of a conversation about diet and saying, what if you ate them 2 less days a week and things like that. And it kind of misses the whole boat about, not using animals, and kind of the philosophy is harder to get through, because it becomes like this, like, bartering negotiation kind of situation. So yeah, I think that's also something to consider. But no, I totally understand that, it's unrealistic to expect people to just like make a switch entirely at once. This is why I think it's so important when we talk to people about when they bring up the fact that they're going to reduce,
Mm-hmm.
that we say that for however long they do take to go vegan, that they will still be contributing to, the slaughter of animals and the exploitation of animals. So it's kind of like communicating the moral imperative, rather than getting into like a kind of a, like I say, kind of just like a negotiation kind of situation with them.
It also is what you said before. It portrays animals as commodities, as like if we go into this bargain, okay, 2 times a week is fine, or 3, or whatever the number might be. We're still seeing animals as commodities. It's just like, where is your threshold? And the threshold should be 0. And I think that's the problem with reducitarianism. So like theoretically, I guess, is different than what vegans should advocate for when they're actually talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this idea that you should be willing to ask for what you want, and when you ask for less than what you want and you get it, then you're kind of stuck with what you asked for. I think that also pertains to kind of bigger issues about how we advocate for different systematic change. There's organizations I know of that go after slaughterhouses and the industry on the grounds that like they're doing something very unsanitary, for example, and we'll try to kind of bring up like the health hazard of having like slaughterhouses in your neighborhood, or they'll bring up like the environmental impact on like the local ecosystems, things like that. And I think, trying to hit those industries in their pocket and get them in trouble legislatively could be a good thing, but it's kind of one of those things where, again, if they do reach the ideal situation, then you appear dishonest and inauthentic, because if you're still going after them, you will have to change your point of where you're coming from. It's like oh, actually, it's great that you like aren't having fluids leaking out onto the sidewalk from animals, but we actually our issue, now that you spent all this money and made sure that all your stuff is sealed and being done in this way, we actually had an issue with what you're doing on ethical grounds to begin with. So
yeah.
So we've reached about an hour and a half, and I know these things can tend to just go on and on and on. So I wanted to know if you guys had any topics that you wanted to kind of bring up or explore or anything like that before we kind of wrap it up.
From my side, just like thanks for having us. It was super interesting, super insightful to me. Also learned some new things, and yeah, thank you.
It was a very interesting discussion. Thank you for challenging us and the way we think.
I hope I didn't come off in any way as like adversarially challenging in any way, That's good.
You're super nice.
I appreciate it. I want to see if anybody, just like within the comments, I know there was a discussion about lab grown meat. I just want to see if anybody said anything that we could answer. So I know Dobrik and Lewis were talking about lab grown meat, but I don't see any other questions for us. I do apologize if I missed any. Yeah, I guess lastly, I just want to ask you guys what your plans are for your channel in terms of things that you kind of see as things on the horizon, in terms of whether it's more like making reaction videos to different things or parodies or skits or any kind of, is there any way of kind of anything you're thinking about with like kind of a injection of creativity or anything like that?
So we realized that we kind of enjoy interviews, so we probably will do a bit more of that. As Nick said before, we also went to a sanctuary and we have lots of footage of the vegan sanctuary, and we also got an interview with the owner of the sanctuary. So that's something
wonderful.
that we will, it was really nice. They were amazing. And we will continue what we were doing before, which is this mystifying things, science-based or about veganism. So we were thinking that our next video will be about pregnancy and breastfeeding, and what does the science say about that when you're on a vegan diet, and what we should watch out for or not.
That's awesome. I think you guys have such a good angle that you can really kind of build on, which I would see as being a really good way to kind of like, you have a really good way of communicating concepts in a non-confrontational, non-intimidating way. I think if you just almost serve as like a non-apologetic, which I'm not saying that you need to change in order to do this. I'm saying this is what I see, and this is what I believe would be awesome if you kept doing, would be just to continue to serve. I've seen nothing from you that was like apologetic about being vegan, nothing that was like, half step kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's all been extremely welcoming and charitable to people's concerns at the same time, and understanding and kind of guiding. And I think so many people need somebody to kind of like look up to show them like, all right, like they're, from their perspective, they're like, I've been doing something I don't want to be doing, but this is overwhelming. Like, what about this? What about that? How could I learn about this without getting like, beaten down about what I've been doing even more? Cause like, they're like, I know. I just need guidance. So I think you guys like, it's so phenomenal that you guys are being, people that people can count on for those different topics.
Thanks so much.
That our goal was also to demystify science a little bit, because I guess currently there's so much information, so many different counterpoints on anything. And coming from science, for me, it's very important to be able to also put that information out in a very concise and nuanced way, because that's how science works. It's not objective. It's not this way or that way. This is what the information we currently have. This is what we talk about. And this is how it is. And this is the facts we currently can work on with. So that was also important to us, to make it accessible to everyone, because it is complicated. I accept that.
It's awesome that you guys come from that perspective, because I mean, science is kind of a universal language, and like you're saying, it's not so cut and dry. It's very much like, these are what the current theories support, and even a lot of the very established science has been kind of thwarted in a way by a lot of people saying like, oh, you don't need fiber actually, and things like that. So
yes,
being able to support those ideas, being more, I don't want to say accepted, because they're already accepted, but just, being one more person on the side of actually getting, I hate to say just the truth, but I mean, getting the scientific conclusions more visibility, and giving them more credence is really awesome.
Yeah. Also, because I think that would also be it's also nice for us to learn certain things that we also had questions about, because being vegan could be okay, but what about these other products that we hadn't thought before? Because as you said, it's not just about diet, it's many other things. And I think it's nice to also know where to look for those and what to watch out for.
Absolutely. It's a never-ending process. I mean, every day you learn about some way, you're like, oh my God, like people, like get with it. Like, you just learn about some other way that humans are exploiting animals. But, and, science is the kind of similar thing where you just learn something every time you look into it. It's like there's so many degrees of nuance, and it's just never-ending study. But that's awesome that, you guys are committed to continuing to learn and continuing to educate. And I think that the best kind of educator that a person could ask for is that kind of an educator, rather than somebody who's like, I have all my information, and and just like is operating from a crystallized knowledge, as compared to something that's continually evolving.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you guys again for coming on, and I encourage anybody watching to subscribe to, how do you pronounce it, Einkenartig?
Yes, perfect.
I pronounce it Einkenartig.
Okay, is that a German word?
No.
It's a mixture between our names and
No, I mean, it's a mix between einzigartig, which means unique in German, right? I'm not mistaken on this one. And Keen is from this Japanese, I hope I'm not butchering this, art of fixing ceramic with gold. And I found this very poetic. It's unique in fixing what's broken, but it's not actually broken. And I don't know, I just fell in love with the art, and I thought the combination was very unique. So
is it like the idea of kind of gluing ceramic together with gold and kind of like in the cracks? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really
Very
nice.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys again for coming on. And again, I encourage everybody to check out their channel and subscribe. And I hope to see a lot of awesome stuff from you guys in the future. I have really high hopes that you guys are just your channel is gonna take off, and it's just gonna be something really beautiful to witness. So, and Nick, I think I haven't seen you on your channel, but you have a really awesome way of delivering concisely your different concepts and stuff like that you believe. So I think it would be really awesome if you would consider also being on the channel too.
Yeah,
He's behind
thanks so
the
much.
camera.
So far behind the camera, but for example, on the sanctuary video, I'm in front of the camera, so maybe there will be more in the future. Yeah, but
awesome.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, sanctuary videos are also so great because a lot of times people will answer surveys where they're asked what made them go vegan by saying it just took meeting the animals. It wasn't a documentary. It wasn't logic. It was just meeting the animals and being like, wow,
Yeah.
like you're a fellow earthling,
Yeah.
So I'll definitely be looking forward to that too.
Nice.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and wish you guys all the best. And you have my email and Discord name and stuff, so anytime you want to reach out, just click away.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
All the best
Awesome.
for you too.
Thank you. All right, take care, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.